Well, for the final time in 2021, welcome to the Backmarkers F1 Show podcast. This is episode number 126, where we're going to be recapping the 2021 season as a whole. And for the final time this year, I am your host, Chris Cato, and very pleased to be joined by my fellow backmarkers, Tyler McDonald and Shaker Barty, as we bid farewell to what was one of the best seasons ever in Formula One. So to help me break it all down is Tyler and Shaker. Good evening to you, gentlemen. How are you today?
I thought you were going.
I was going to throw you off this for the last one, Tyler.
You did throw me off.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, Chris, no, it's great to be here at the end of what was a fantastic season in F1. Big 2021 season saw pretty much everything we could imagine that it could have dealt us. And what a fantastic year it was for Formula One. I can't wait for next season, but let's focus on recapping this crazy season that we had.
Yeah, man, it's very excited. It's kind of just want to get right into it, to be honest, like to recap this season. It's very exciting.
Yeah, let's do it. There's so much to talk about that we're going to try and condense in this 1 hour or so. Just to let everybody know kind of the format that we're going to do here for today's podcast, we're just going to start off the show by discussing some of our favorite moments of the season, favorite races, things like that. And then we're going to go through the constructor standing. So as the teams finished in 2021, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about each team and driver. Some teams, obviously, we're going to discuss in great detail. And unfortunately, maybe some of the lower end teams we're only just going to talk about briefly, just because we have so many things to get to, and obviously we'll get to your fan questions at the end of this episode. So use the timestamps down below in the YouTube's videos if you want to skip ahead to your favorite team or driver. If you're listening to us on an audio platform, then bear with us for this whole hour. So let's buckle our seatbelts and get this thing started. And we're going to go with maybe not the easiest question to begin with, but there's so many options to choose from just because we had such a great season. But Tyler, I'll start with you. What would you pick as your best race of 2021? Or maybe just a personal favorite of yours that you saw this season?
I told you I wanted to go last because I wanted to hear what you guys.
I threw a curveball at you too.
Oh, man.
I'm still deciding. I thought we were going to do this question last, but okay.
I thought so too. Okay. I'm going to go with, I get two options, you said?
Sure, as many as you want.
As many as I want. I'll go with two options. I'm going to go number one. My favorite Grand Prix was, actually, you know what? They're both Italian races. Now, my favorite Grand Prix was Imola. I thought that was an unbelievable race with all the dramatics happening. Lewis, of course, locking up into the gravel trap and just being able to stay on track or in the race, should say. Of course, the crash between Bottas and George Russell. Yeah, Nicholas Latifi have a moment as well, along with Mick Schumacher, and of course the undulating track with the rain. And going from wet to dry, and the very fine margin there was for error at that tight racetrack. I thought it was a phenomenal race, and Max Verstappen ends up coming out with a victory in that one as well. So just a phenomenal race, in my opinion. And of course, Monza, I think maybe it wasn't the most exciting race, but I thought it gave one of the best moments of the season. Of course, we had Lewis's car being mounted by Max Verstappen, you could say, from behind. And that gave us one of the crazier pictures of the season. But for me, having Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo finish 1-2, of course, Ricciardo getting the race win, I thought was unbelievable. It was one of my favorite moments of 2021 to see those two up there and see McLaren do so well. And, I felt for Danny Rick that this was something that I was very happy for him to have.
Okay, yeah, those are all pretty good moments there too. And Imola was actually on the top of my list as one of the favorite races of the year, and it was only the second race of the year. Shaker, I'll give you just a few more minutes to make your decisions, and I'll go next on this one. So I think probably tied into maybe the next topic that we'll talk about in terms of our favorite moment of the season, but of course the final race of the year would probably be a pick of many of the fans just because of how crazy it was and everything that was on the line. But my favorite race of the season, maybe not in terms of the quality, but in terms of the dramatics, and also my favorite podium of this year was the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I really enjoyed that race because the final 10 laps or so was just such a dramatic and crazy end to the race. You had Verstappen's puncture after he was in command and control of the lead and looked set to take a Red Bull 1-2. And then, of course, that really turned everything around. You had the red flag restart, Lewis Hamilton locking up into turn 1, then Checo Perez taking the lead, eventually going on to get his first win for Red Bull, but also behind them as well, Sebastian Vettel with a terrific race all race long to get himself into that position to get P2, and then Pierre Gasly passing Charles Leclerc on the final lap to get the third place and Alpha Tauri's only podium this season. So my vote is for the 2021 Azerbaijan Grand Prix as my favorite because I love that podium with the three of them up there, and especially at the time when Checo was still struggling a little bit to get used to the Red Bull, for him to get that win was really, really big, and it kind of neutralized the championship as well because both Verstappen and Hamilton didn't end up scoring, so just a great day in general in Baku. So, Shaker, have you picked one yet?
I picked one for sure, and it's definitely gonna be Monza, obviously with the crazy accident and everything, and Danny Rick's win, as Tyler mentioned. I had a hard time kind of like narrowing it down to two between France and Spain, and you're probably gonna be like, oh, what? But like, honestly, when have France and Spain ever been in contending for a race of the year, right? And yeah, I'm just finishing watching like the highlights of the Spanish Grand Prix, but yeah, I have to. It's hard to narrow down between the two because like I said, I've never found them to be exciting, but I'm gonna go with France. I think I'm going to go with France. Sergio Perez getting the podium, big Red Bull 1-2 finish. And I think this is at the point where we were kind of like, oh, Red Bull might actually be in contention to, actually maybe be in constructors as well as a world championship. So, yeah, I'm going to go with France.
I'm very surprised none of us picked Hungary. I kind of left that out there because I thought that's what you boys were going to pick. But that's another crazy race with Esteban Ocon getting, of course, his first race victory.
I'm saving that one.
Oh,
I mentioned it right before the race, but yeah, that's gonna be coming up later.
I'm surprised both of you left out the 2021 Belgian Grand Prix. I mean, what a classic that was.
Yes, I was gonna make a joke about that as well, but nice one. Yeah, George Russell, big podium for George Russell.
That's right.
It was funny. I was going through, I was texting my buddies, and they were like, oh, it's always Max versus Lewis. And I said, they're like, he doesn't want to watch because it's a 2-horse race. I was like, well, if you'd be surprised, there was 6 different teams with podiums. And then or it was 5. Then I had to text him back and be like, just kidding. There's one more. George Russell got a podium in Belgium.
Yeah.
Completely forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I was like mentioning it, Tyler, like Netherlands was also in my contention, but that was more because of like, just the overall like domination of Max Verstappen that entire weekend, and just to see all those Dutch fans finally be able to have a home Grand Prix for like, I guess, their world championship winner now. So yeah, I'm even more excited to see what it's like next year. So I'm sure they're going to have a great home Grand Prix for Max.
Yeah, it's probably going to be really insane next year. And of course, Max will be running the number 1 on his car next year. So it'll be a lot of MV1 merchandise around the Zandvoort circuit. So those are all great races you guys mentioned, and there was plenty of more really solid races like Shaker, you bringing up France and Spain, really interesting strategic races as well, but also just exciting with the championship on the line. It made some of these more boring tracks. Here's another one I'll throw in there, Russia. Sochi could have been the race of the year with the rain and Norris leading, and then not the switching onto the slick tires and the intermediate tires. So altogether, the tracks that normally we kind of fell asleep on and weren't really looking forward to doing many race recaps ended up being some of the most exciting. So those are just some of the couple ones that we mentioned. I'm sure there's probably a few more that were really exciting that didn't make our top 3 or top 5. But of course, comment section is wide open for our fans as well to let us know what your favorite race of 2021 is. So that does it for our favorite race. Now, I wanted to ask you guys just to pick out one moment from this entire season. This might be even harder to do because there's so many. There's big ones, there's small ones. But if you could pick just one moment that maybe brought you the most excitement, brought you the most joy, or just really made you the most happiest of watching Formula One this year, could you pick one moment out of the 21 races that you really, really remember going into next year?
Well, I think the obvious one is Max crossing the line and winning the world title. And pure emotion that comes out of that. But I'm going to stay clear of that, and I'm going to pick the reason why I picked Monza, and that's the 1-2 for McLaren, the only 1-2 this season for any team on the grid. And I just thought it was so deserving for not only Daniel Ricciardo, for Lando Norris, for Zach Brown, and the entire McLaren team from what they had just a few years back to where they are now, and how strong their form was, especially at the start of the season. I thought that that was such a special moment, and one that McLaren will look back on and cherish for a long time, I'm sure. And who knows, we'll see more of that next season. We won't know what's going to happen, but I loved that moment for both of them.
So this is where I bring back Hungary. I mentioned this to Tyler right before we went on, but I have shit talked Esteban Ocon a lot. And just to have him turn that entire, come back with Renault, I guess Alpine now in his second season, to be, the Frenchman leading the team and get a podium for them for the first time in a long time. I thought it was going to be Alonso that did it. So that I think that is my favorite moment of 2021. And obviously it was a great race overall as well. And, I'm taking this away from the fact that Max won, so that is my favorite moment. But this is just like one of those moments that I can be like, yeah, okay, I can take back my words about Esteban Ocon and be like, good for him.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my moment as well, because I was going to say what you said, Tyler, off the top, which is my number one moment definitely has to be when Verstappen crossed the line, and hearing that outpouring of emotion from a first-time world champion was something really, really special to witness. But I think the next one for me would be Esteban Ocon's first win. And the same thing, when he crossed the line, and the emotion of that victory is what really stood out to me for 2021. So we didn't really get many different winners this year outside of obviously Max and Lewis. So to get a first-time winner in Esteban Ocon was very, very special. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see other drivers get their first wins. Norris was close a couple of times, but I think that was a really, really special moment. And the other one too, George Russell's P2 in Belgium, that one lap there was extremely special. And also Lando Norris's pole in Russia, just to throw in an honorable mention, was a pretty cool moment to see. So those are just some small ones there that we could maybe pick out. But like we said, there's so many from the entire season. And of course, the majority of them come from the championship battle between Verstappen and Hamilton. But we're trying to put a little bit more spotlight on the ones that weren't affected by the championship. So just a couple of our favorite moments there. Now, before we move on to reviewing all of the teams and the drivers and how their seasons panned out, the final question I'll pose to you guys is, who would you give your Driver of the Year award to? Now, small caveat to this list, obviously one of the most obvious choices is going to be either Max or Lewis, and I think probably the three of us would pick Verstappen as the Driver of the Year, of course being world champion, 10 victories, 10 pole positions, setting the single season record for most podiums with 18. So we're not going to do the obvious choice. So outside of Max and Lewis, who would you vote as your Driver of the Year, Tyler?
This is a tough one. I had three drivers that I was really trying to decide between, but I think I'm going to pick Pierre Gasly. I thought he was unbelievable this season. He had some great form. Obviously, only the one podium in Azerbaijan, but I think he deserved a lot more than that. And he had a few fourth place finishes, a really good qualifying pace throughout the season, and really showed that he is such a talented driver. Of course, he had that win last season, and I know he was looking for another one this year. But I think that Pierre Gasly is one of those hidden talents that might not be hidden for much longer if a big team kind of sniffs and picks him up.
I'm on the same boat, Tyler. I had three: Pierre Gasly, Sainz, and Lando Norris. I'm going to go with Sainz's first year at Ferrari, first one to get the podium for Ferrari this year. Ended up coming back and beating Charles Leclerc, his teammate. So I'm going to go with Sainz, Driver of the Year for me. I was not expecting him to do so well in that car this year. So
both excellent choices, and I like the Sainz one there too. He was tied with, well, he sort of was tied with my Driver of the Year, and somebody he knows very well, his former teammate, Lando Norris, who I would pick as my Driver of the Year, because I think that despite the fact that in the final 7 to 8 races, McLaren had a lot of struggles and a little bit of bad luck on Norris's side, had quite a few punctures in Qatar, and then in the final race as well, if you guys remember those. But really, up until Russia, he was just outstanding all year long. Like you mentioned, Tyler, he was second in Italy, securing McLaren's 1-2 and the only 1-2 finish in all of 2021 for McLaren. So very well done to them. But just going up with that, he had multiple podiums this year. The pole position in Russia, had the race victory almost in hand in Russia had the weather not changed so drastically, and he'll learn from that obviously going into the next season. So I just think when you also look at McLaren losing third in the constructors battle, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes time, a lot of that was not because of Norris's performances. It was the second driver there not holding up his end of the bargain through the first part of the season. So Norris for me is my driver of the year. Now, if you guys are curious to find out who the F1 team principals voted as driver of the year, I do have the list up right here. Maybe some interesting here. Now, I believe the only team principal to not vote in this was Mattia Binotto of Ferrari. But here's the team principal top 10 drivers of 2021. We have, of course, number 1, Max Verstappen. Number 2, Lewis Hamilton. Number 3, Lando Norris. Number 4, Carlos Sainz. Number 5, Fernando Alonso. 6, Charles Leclerc. 7, Pierre Gasly. George Russell in 8th. 9th, Valtteri Bottas, and Esteban Ocon rounding out the top 10 drivers of the year. What do you guys think of the team principal list there?
I'm surprised Pierre Gasly's that low. I thought he'd be higher than 7.
I thought Pierre Gasly would have been like top 5 for sure. Who was number 3?
Lando Norris.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, as a great overall team, McLaren did above my expectations this year. So, and number 4 was
Carlos Sainz. 5 was Alonso. 4 was Sainz.
I feel like the only person I drop maybe by 1 and like replace with Pierre Gasly is Alonso there. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I would agree with that. I was surprised to see him all the way down. I was surprised to see Charles Leclerc ahead of Pierre Gasly. That I don't really agree with.
That one was surprising for sure.
Yeah.
And Binotto didn't even vote, so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Ferrari's paying Haas and
I know.
to put some votes there.
Yeah, probably they are. Yeah. But it's an interesting list nonetheless, right? But that's just kind of the poll that they did at the end of the year from the team principals. So that'll do it for just a little bit of our favorite little moments of the season. I'm sure some more will come up during the rest of this 45 minutes or so, but let's dive right into reviewing all the teams and the drivers for this season, and we're going to go through the top 10 list in terms of where they finished in the constructors standing. So we're going to start with Mercedes, first of all, who we do have to mention in regards to all the drama that happened in Abu Dhabi. They did win their 8th consecutive constructors title, which is just an astounding record in Formula One that I don't think will ever be beaten. And I know that they were extremely disappointed, and they still are disappointed, even though we're recording this actually 7 days later from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. But I think that they have to look back and see that 8th constructors titles is an absolutely incredible achievement. And they've really, really had a solid end to this season, which put them in contention for even the Drivers' Championship going into the last race. So just looking at their stats, they have 9 wins in 2021, 20 podiums. Lewis Hamilton finished second in the driver's standings with 8 wins, while Valtteri Bottas was third in the driver's standings with 1 win and 11 podiums. So starting with you again, Tyler, just give me your general thoughts on Mercedes' 2021 season. And in the earliest prediction of this year when we did our podcast preseason, you and I both predicted Mercedes to be top of the constructor standing. So even though they lost the drivers, they still got the grasp on the turbo hybrid era in terms of the constructors.
Yeah, I think that this should be a season of fight back for Mercedes because they weren't the best car to start the season. And especially midway through, I mean, if you look between the Monaco GP and the Austrian GP, that's 5 races, 5 wins for Red Bull in a row, which at that point showed that Red Bull has the fastest car this year. But especially in the last 4 races of the season, I thought Mercedes did a great job of clawing back and finding some sort of innovation that worked really well for them and provided a very, very fast car and the best car on the grid at the end of the year. So it's a bittersweet for them. Of course, Valtteri was celebrating because He won a constructors championship, but half the garage wasn't celebrating. So it's almost a forgotten, awkward eighth victory for Mercedes. They'll enjoy getting the sweep of the turbo hybrid era, or whatever you're going to call this era, because next era we don't know what it's called yet. But in the end, they wanted to have the drivers sweep the drivers and the constructors for 8 years.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of expected that Mercedes was going to win the constructors at the beginning. But yeah, it was just kind of surprising to see Red Bull kind of claw back from over the break, and did what they did for the first half of the season. So, I mean, overall, it was a great season for them. They still won constructors, but it's kind of like a half glass full, a half full situation there. Like you won constructors, but you didn't win the world championship. So did you really have the best car on the grid, even if you won constructors? So.
Yeah, and that's actually a fan question that we'll get to at the end of the show in terms of who had the faster car all year. But yeah, it's a mixed bag of emotions, like you guys said, for their whole entire season. I do think that in many ways, with the way that the season started and the run that they went on in the mid-pack of the season that you mentioned there, Tyler, in a lot of ways, they were lucky to have the Drivers' Championship at least come down to the final race because of just how good Verstappen was in the first 10 to 12 races of the year. I think that Red Bull, which we'll get to next, kind of slipped a little bit in terms of their pace after the Holland GP and Italy, for example. So I think that Mercedes will be looking back on it to say, look, we ended the season very strongly by making some little upgrades and updates to our car. And I think that in the beginning of the year, they really struggled to find the setup of the car, the ideal setup going to these tracks. By the end of the year, we saw that they really knew their car inside and out and were able to set it up very well to where they were fast in the race, they were fast in qualifying. Having those fresh engines at the back end of the year certainly helped as well. So it really was a good season again for Mercedes. But before we move off of them, I just want to get your guys' quick thoughts on obviously the aftermath of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Mercedes did not eventually end up appealing because they said that they would have a pretty decent legal case on their hands, but no way that the decision would get overturned in terms of giving them the world championship instead of Verstappen. So they decided to go against it. Their fan base is still extremely upset 7 days later. A lot of the fans, neutral fans at least, have moved on, but they haven't moved on yet. And of course, Mercedes did not attend the FIA Prize Gala. Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton were absent. So just some quick thoughts from you guys on them, kind of putting a rest to this whole drama and moving on to 2022.
Well, I don't know if I would call it putting a rest to it. If they put a rest to it, they would have showed up at the prize gala, Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton, that is. I was just really, really disappointed by that, especially from a 7-time world champion and an 8-time constructors champion. I thought that was very petty to not respect Max Verstappen and hand the trophy over to him. It was his reign, and Lewis has had a lot of accomplishment in his career. I think it would have been nice for him to be there to congratulate others on their accomplishment. And Valtteri was there, James was there to receive the constructors championship. There were some Mercedes members there, but of course the two main characters, you could say, in this season, Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton, were not. So the not doing the appeal doesn't really change my mind on everything that was going on. Obviously they weren't going to overturn the world championship. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out. But yeah, I'm very disappointed for them for not attending the F1 prize gala. This could all just be avoided by just handing the world championship right then on the podium.
Thank you.
And then you have a prize gala as well too. Sure, whatever. But I don't know. Anyways,
I mean, this is going to be like a stupid metaphor, but there's a reason in every sport they shake hands at the end of the game. Because whatever was happened on the court or on the ice or whatever it was, you shake it off afterwards. It kind of seems like that's what the gala is here, and it seems like they didn't really shake it off. They just kind of, avoided all eye contact, and they're like, you know what, we're kind of okay with this situation. We'll just let it slide. But yeah, it was kind of, like Tyler said, it's kind of disrespectful to not show up and be that 8-time world constructor championship and 7-time world championship winner, and not be there for the next part
part that I found really disappointing was, look, I understand that they were incredibly upset with the FIA. They still are. 7 days later, of course. I don't know if you guys saw clips from Toto Wolff's press conference. It was it was strange to say the least. Like I said, I understand that they're upset, but it just felt a little bit like a drama show, honestly. He had the turtleneck on. He kind of looked like, a Bond villain type character, and, it was like somebody died, honestly. That's how they were acting. And it's like, like you said, Tyler, for 8-time world champions, it was not necessarily what I was expecting, regardless of the fact that they have every right to be upset. The rules were broken. They weren't followed correctly. They have every right to be frustrated and pissed off. But as you guys mentioned too, I think that as the world champions, if you weren't going to go to the gala, don't go for the FIA, of course, but go for your team. Go for the 1,000 people working for you. The worst part is that, the World Championship cars are brought to the FIA Gala. So the WEC car was there, other World Rally Championships. Mercedes didn't even bring their Formula E World Championship car to this gala as well. So, why punish them when they have nothing to do with this, right? And like you guys said, Valtteri and James are there, but Toto and Lewis aren't there. I would have just said, let's just suck it up. And we're not going to do this for the FIA, but we're going to do this for our team that we won the Constructors' Championship for. I understand they had a big celebration at Brackley a few days ago, which was nice to see. And they're all congratulating there. So that's fine. But yeah, I would agree. I think I would have liked to see them go there and at least pay those respects to their fellow competitors who they said, Toto said all the right things, that Verstappen and Red Bull had nothing to be blamed for. They were deserving champions. But yeah, it was just a little bit unfortunate to see that happen. Understandable, I guess, but it's nice that at least on our end, we're kind of moving past all the drama and everything. But there's even some...
That's until there's a Spygate at testing next season.
Yeah. Well, but here's another area to this conversation before we move off of Mercedes for the final time. There's even rumors now of Lewis Hamilton possibly even retiring because he's so disillusioned and disappointed with Formula One, which I just think that's ridiculous. And I think that Toto Wolff was playing up the drama when he answered this question to say he's not sure what Lewis is going to do. I mean, look, I think this is ridiculous to suggest that Hamilton's just going to give it up after a loss like this. I absolutely don't see it happening. I mean, what do you guys think just quickly on that topic?
If he retires, I think that's going to be the most disappointing decision in possibly F1 history. It'd be worse than the FIA's decision. I mean, it will be. Everyone wants to see Lewis Hamilton race. He's one of the greatest of all time. We want to see this battle between him and Verstappen mature and keep going forward. It's phenomenal for the sport, and it's phenomenal for Lewis's career to have that sort of amazing battle. Yes, he had the Rosberg one, but he dominated the rest. In the Mercedes, I should say, the McLaren one too. That's a special moment as well for his first world championship. But we want to see the battle between Max and Lewis, and for Lewis, this is his time to shine, to come back and to avenge his last lap loss this season. If you're Lewis, in my opinion, if I was Lewis, I would be chomping at the bit to get back in that car for testing and try and dominate another era.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Lewis has fought 3 real world championships that he's actually had to fight for, including the one this year. All the, the other ones, yeah, he ended up winning. There was competition, but there was no clear. We knew Lewis was going to win it at the end, and to not go and be the record title holder after being this amazing competitor throughout the years. Lewis has achieved so much. He used to be this quiet, shy guy who came out in this race, and now he's everybody knows Lewis Hamilton's name, and you can't. And like Tyler said, it's great for F1. How many people tuned in this year to see Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world championship winner, this guy who's been here for so long, fight this 23-year-old who's going to win his first world championship. And that rivalry should keep growing because it makes both of them better, not just Lewis. It's making the entire grid see what they can achieve if they keep doing what they're doing. So I agree. I think it would be a huge disappointment if Lewis ends up retiring this season. I know Seb really wants it, but unfortunately, I don't see it happening.
No, neither did I. And that's why I was just curious to ask you guys, but I figured that would be your answer. So yeah, I think maybe just playing up the dramatics a little bit, but he'll take some time off.
Netflix.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, right? I mean, imagine that, though, right? Who's going to partner George Russell then in case
Oh,
that scenario happens?
I know exactly who it is.
Valtteri?
No, it's Lance.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, yeah, I could see that happening for sure.
And then Nick DeVries would move into Aston Martin.
Mm.
There you
That
go.
would be my prediction.
Sebastian Vettel going to Mercedes.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no.
Different driver,
Probably not now, yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Wouldn't see
Yeah.
it now. Yeah. Well, we're getting into our crazy 22 predictions already. But anyways,
Has begun.
Silly season.
yeah,
Silly season.
yeah. Well, starting it early. Okay, so that will do it then for Mercedes, of course, Constructors Champions for 2021. So the next one that we're going to move on to is obviously on the flip side of things, which is the Drivers' World Championship team, which is Red Bull, who finished second this year. Just looking at their season stats, 11 wins altogether, 19 podiums. You had Max Verstappen, of course, the world champion, finishing in first, with 10 wins and 10 poles, and then Sergio Perez finishing fourth in the Drivers' Championship with 1 victory and 5 podium finishes. So, what are your boys' thoughts on Red Bull as a whole? They had a shot at the Constructors' Championship. They did have a great season as a team. They helped create the closest Constructors' Championship battle ever. Of course, that went down to the final race as well. Had certain things not gone their way, of course, with DNFs and unlucky crashes. They probably could have been Constructors' Championship champions as well. But Tyler, just some thoughts on Red Bull's season as a whole, and then, of course, their drivers, Verstappen and Perez, and that partnership, how it ended up working out.
Yeah, again, it was a season where they started off really hot, and they were definitely favorites for the World Championship, at the midway point. But in the end, they just lacked. I'd say they lacked innovation on the car in the last quarter of the season, and that's what cost them the World Championship. And whether they're focusing on 2022, who knows? I mean, I would be if I was Red Bull as well. I don't blame them. But they got the rug pulled from under them by Mercedes at the end of the season. But all in all, a very successful season for Red Bull, and they should be happy with the second place that they got. I know it's kind of counterintuitive when you're Red Bull, but it was a very impressive season. And the partnership between between Sergio and Max, that worked out very well. I thought Perez added a very good fight for most of the races. Obviously, there's a few races where we were questioning whether or not he was the right teammate. But in the end, clearly, I think he was, and that's a good partnership for next season as well. And I think for what Sergio did, bringing Lewis closer at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, I think they have to keep Sergio after that one, because Max was very happy with Sergio making that move and holding Lewis Hamilton up.
Yeah, I mean, Red Bull was fantastic this year. I just everything worked for them this year. They got the luck that they wanted finally at the end of the season. I think I was just counting. I think they won 8 fastest laps throughout the year. I think Mercedes won 10 or 11. So, I mean, they really brought competition this year, and that's what we've been asking from Red Bull for the last few years now. And to finally see it happen and all work out for Max. And I think halfway through the season, I was not too sure with Sergio, because obviously he was there. I was just in terms of the podium finishes to get the constructors. But yeah, just the end of the season, Sergio was amazing. He was that perfect number 2 driver that Red Bull and Max needed to get him the World Championship. And at one point, I think they can get constructors as well. So we'll see.
I think out of the 2 teams, Sergio Perez ended up playing the biggest X factor in the championship, way more than Valtteri Bottas. You could argue that Bottas was better throughout the course of the whole season, but in very specific, important moments, Sergio Perez was far better, like the race in Abu Dhabi, where he was up there, qualified in 4th, and then ended up being in the podium positions all race, helping out Max. Whereas Valtteri was down in 6th and sometimes even 8th place, unable to help his teammate. And go back to other races as well. France, like you mentioned off the top of the show, Shaker, that was an important race, with Checo finishing in P3, being in Hamilton's pit stop window, forcing Mercedes into limited strategy options. His defense on Hamilton in Turkey was another fantastic effort as well. The USA Grand Prix, helping Verstappen out in terms of strategy. So he had his rough moments this year, Sergio Perez, but I think he had a really, really strong 2021. And the thing I liked about Red Bull this season was, after all the years of the number 2 driver controversies and dropping drivers and the dysfunctionality sometimes we saw of the team, they really became a cohesive group in 2021 where they were all working together to achieve the common goal that they finally achieved, which was to beat Mercedes and get the Drivers' Championship. And they love Sergio Perez now. I mean, Max Verstappen outright said that he would not be world champion without Sergio Perez. So they've really created themselves a nice family, cohesive group at Red Bull, which I think is good for the next couple of years. Unfortunate they couldn't get the Constructors' Championship, but the big one really was Max Verstappen and the Drivers' Championship, and we talked about him a little bit in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix recap. Just an absolutely phenomenal season from his standpoint, and the thing that really surprised me about him this year was just how calm and cool he was under the most pressurized moments this year. His home Grand Prix in Zandvoort, the final race here in Abu Dhabi. I was waiting for him all season to finally have that moment where the pressure got to him, and it took until the second last race of the year when he crashed in qualifying in Saudi Arabia till we finally saw a little bit of the pressure getting to him. But I know he's only 24, but it was just incredibly impressive to see how good he was in his first time battling for a championship against one of the greatest drivers ever, no less.
Yeah. I think you already mentioned it, but I think like the common goal thing, I think Red Bull, they never never accepted their identity a few years, up until this year. They are fighting to get Max the world championship. They're not also fighting for constructors. And I think after they, finally focus in on that, got Sergio Perez in a spot to do it, where it seemed like Mercedes had two battles. They had they had the constructors and the world championship battle with Lewis, and it kind of seemed like Valtteri was on his own too. He was fighting his own fight. So where it seems like Red Bull was just a cohesive unit throughout.
Yep, 100%. So I think that'll wrap it up then on the two championship contenders for this year. That'll probably be our longest little spiel about the two teams. We're going to speed things up a little bit here and go down the rest of the constructor standings. Third place, Ferrari. And we have to say what an incredible year from Ferrari to come from where they did in 2020, finishing 6th last season, and of course just being one of the worst seasons ever. But they ended up getting 5 podiums this year, 2 pole positions, courtesy of Charles Leclerc. Carlos Sainz, as we already mentioned, 5th in the Drivers' Championship, 4 podium finishes. Charles Leclerc ended up finishing 7th with only 1 podium finish. But I do have to say that excellent signs for Ferrari's recovery heading into next season, because last year they looked absolutely awful. They were the 7th best team at certain points of 2020. So in the carryover year where not many changes happened, of course the floor changes and elsewhere, but I think that third place for them is an incredible achievement considering McLaren's form. So Tyler, just a few thoughts on Ferrari's 2021 season.
Yeah, we definitely didn't think at the start of the season that they would finish third. We definitely thought it'd be McLaren, who are miles above the rest, but great job by Ferrari to come back and to snag third position. That's huge for them, not only for pride, but for prize money as well. Obviously, they get paid a lot of money, Ferrari, if not still the top out of anyone. And of course, that's kind of slimmed down with the cost cap coming into effect next season. But if they can continue their innovation and be up to where Ferrari should be, obviously, they're going to be title contenders. If we could see the trend, they could be, and probably are favored to be up there for a title for next season, and to be at least fighting for race wins at a consistent basis, which will be nice to see, to have 3 teams fighting at the top again, and hopefully there's more than 3 teams fighting at the top. But yeah, what a night and day season from last year to this year for them.
Yeah, because I think we were originally told that they weren't doing any huge developments for 2021. Mm-hmm. They were going to save their money for 2022. So yeah, and I think I mentioned it. Sainz was a huge surprise for me this year. How he pulled together for Ferrari. Just huge season overall for them as a team as well. And it seems like Sainz and Leclerc get along very well as teammates. It's kind of nice to see that, because we saw what happened in 2020 with Vettel and Leclerc. So it's kind of nice to have both those Ferrari drivers fighting it out and see what happens. And it seems like they have respect for each other. If the other drivers doing better than the other, they'll let them through, and they're working really well together as one unit. So
I think probably the driver most surprised with Sainz's first season at Ferrari was Charles Leclerc, because he's going to need to step his game up a little bit, because Sainz, probably the best driver in terms of adaptability. I mean, he's been on 3 or 4 different teams in his young career, and he's always been on it from the onset of his career at a new team. So I am a little bit surprised, though, just how well he fit in with Ferrari. Like we mentioned, 4 podiums versus only 1 from Charles Leclerc. I know Leclerc did have some bad luck this season, but I expected him to be a little bit higher than 7th in the championship. So he's got a lot of work cut out for him next season with Sainz, and they are good buddies now. They're getting along well now, but if they are fighting for the championship, I think we could see that relationship dissolve pretty quickly, because Sainz is probably one of the more underrated drivers on the grid, and I think that he'll absolutely give it 100% to try and be a world champion. So watch out for that Ferrari team next season. Hopefully they'll be at the front fighting with Max and Lewis. That would be quite the treat. And the team that they grabbed 3rd place from this season was, of course, McLaren, and that was the secondary battle going on all season long. Pretty disappointing for McLaren. They had a really good first half of the year and then eventually lost out the championship in the final third of the season. They had 1 victory this year, courtesy of Daniel Ricciardo, 5 podium finishes together, Lando Norris bringing 4 of those. Norris finished 6th in the Drivers' Championship versus Daniel Ricciardo, who was 8th in the Drivers' Championship. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, only team to score a 1-2 this season. So it's kind of strange how they had such a good year. They looked like they were on for 3rd place, but I think that Daniel Ricciardo's early season struggles really came back to haunt them at the end of the year, because they ended up losing out to Ferrari, who had a much more balanced approach with their 2 drivers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a very hot start to the season with Norris getting 2 third-place finishes in Italy and in Monaco, and then followed by another 3rd place in Austria, and then of course you had the 1-2 in Monza, but that was the last time we would see them on the podium for this season. It was a complete nosedive almost, it seemed like, which was very surprising. I mean, there's a lot to take out of the season for McLaren and to have that pace, but like you mentioned, we were talking about, well, Daniel Ricciardo just wait until the summer break and then he'll turn it on, which he did. We weren't wrong on that, because we saw that trend happen when he moved to Renault. And obviously this is the same trend. So I would expect a lot more from Daniel next season. Yeah, he's comfortable with the car and comfortable with the team. It does take him that half season to settle in and be more fluid. But it's still, he kind of have to think. It's unlucky for McLaren, who probably should have had 3rd place this year. I'm not sure what happened to the car at the end of the season, but it was not up to pace with what it was at the start.
I mean, they got a P4.
They're still really good. It's just the way that they were hands down going to be the number 3 team, and then slowly but surely Ferrari crawled back.
I totally agree. I think I was going to say it earlier, but yeah, I totally thought McLaren had constructors 3rd position in the bag this year with Norris and Daniel Ricciardo. But yeah, like you said, it took Ricciardo a little bit to kind of get going. I think Norris was pretty much there all season, but he just needed that. The year before, he had Sainz. He always had Sainz there to help him out. They can work it out as a team and get those points finished that they needed. And if one of them wasn't there, the other one was. So yeah, it was kind of unfortunate with Daniel Ricciardo's season. Really impressed with Lando Norris. I think the one thing I do have to say was I was actually kind of hoping for more improvement from Lando Norris this year. He was still there, don't get me wrong, his improvement was there, but I think I was just expecting a little bit more. But I think that had to do more with the car itself than Lando Norris as the driver. And like you said, I think you mentioned, Tyler, it kind of started to fall off towards the end of the season. They got a couple of qualifying laps here and there, but nothing huge. But I do have a question for you guys. So the big thing, last year with Sainz and Lando Norris being on the same team was, we knew Sainz was a better driver, and then now he goes to Ferrari, and he shows up Charles Leclerc, who's been there for a few years, ends up doing better than Lando Norris by 4.5 points in the driver's standings. Who's the better driver of them, the two now? Is it going to who's going to end up being the better driver? Lando Norris is younger. He's still got a lot of experience to gain, but I'm genuinely curious to see where they end up at the end of their careers.
Yeah, it is a good question. I think for now I'd say Sainz is the better driver because he beat Lando in his career at McLaren, and of course what he did with Charles Leclerc this season. So I think I'd go with the edge to Sainz just because he is a little more experienced as well. but Norris is very close. But I think that Norris just has a few things to shape up in terms of his race pace. Over one lap, he's incredibly quick. Had the pole in Russia, almost had a front row start at Imola. But I think I'd give the edge just to Sainz a little bit here. But it will be interesting if McLaren and Ferrari are able to fight for championships in the coming years. To see those two in two different teams battling out on track will be very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tight between those two, and of course they're good buddies. And who knows what the future will hold with Lando's development and Carlos's development. But I would agree. As of right now, if you were to hand the better driver award, it would go to Carlos, in my opinion. Not by much, but
yeah, very close at the end of the day between the two. So, to round out the top 5 of the constructors' standings is Alpine, formerly known as Renault. Of course, it was Alpine's debut season in that regard under the new branding. And slow start to the year, but boy, did they come on strong, really, as the summer break began. 1 win in 2021, 2 podium finishes. Fernando Alonso finished 10th in the driver's standing with the 1 podium finish recently in Qatar, and Esteban Ocon finishing 11th in the driver's standings, of course, with that infamous victory in Hungary. And Alpine's a little bit of a strange team because they were supposed to be expected to be fighting for championships by this point with the plan that they had ever since they came back into F1, but certainly they're nowhere near at that level anymore. But it was an interesting season. I mean, they started off a little bit rough. They at times looked like the 6th, maybe even 7th fastest team, but Fernando Alonso, after kind of having some early struggles in the year where Esteban Ocon was getting the better of him, he really found his form mid part of the season, and after Hungary, he was just absolutely stellar, and we really got to see that 2-time world champion coming back on the grid with his defense against Lewis Hamilton in Hungary, of course his drive in Qatar, but just overall his consistency was much, much better at the end of the season, and Esteban Ocon did far better than I expected him to, against Fernando Alonso. And I think the only comment I'll make about Alpine before I throw it to you guys is I was surprised just how well they all work together. I mean, they have an excellent, seems like a family environment at that team where they're all working extremely well together. All those earlier reports about, Alonso's toxicity and his difficulty to work with doesn't seem to be true at all. And they've built a really good rapport amongst themselves. So I was pretty impressed to see that. But what did you guys think of Alpine's season this year?
yeah, like you said, maybe the opposite trajectory as what McLaren did, where they started off slow and had a really good end of the season. And if they continue that development to 2022, I mean, I know Alonso was saying hopefully we're going to be up further next season, and he thinks they will be, which is very impressive. I wonder what kind of car they're going to be bringing next season. But it was a solid year for Alpine. I thought that it was great to see Fernando really come back into his form at the end of the season, like you mentioned. I'm really excited to see what he's going to do next season with a full year of shaking the rust off and everything that goes along with that to be back into F1. And for Esteban, I agree with you. He really impressed me this season. I've always enjoyed Esteban Ocon. I thought always thought he was a very good driver. And he got to showcase it a bit this year. The race win is awesome for him. I'd like to see him not have that kind of up and downs that we see a lot. He has a good race, a bad race, good race, a bad race. It'd be nice to see a little more consistency from Esteban, but he's a very talented driver, and if he gets the right car under him, he can really make some damage.
I if you had told me Alpine was going to be 5th place this year, probably would not have agreed with you in the first half of this season. But yeah, they really fought back, man. And I think they were, I say fought back, but they were almost there all season. Just they were always getting those top 10 finishes, even though they were lower, always fighting, the mid-table teams. And not just, it was interesting too, like Alonso with great overtakes all season. I think Esteban Ocon would have to be, from a few years ago, to be my most improved driver, and just he great season, especially those last 3 races. He started P3 to be fighting Lewis Hamilton and Max, holding them back, and I think he had a fun season too. He was posting memes all season, so no, it was Alpine was great, and like you mentioned, Chris, the toxicity from Alonso. I think we mentioned it. We don't know how it was going to be with Alpine because technically they're still Renault. It's the exact same team minus a few people here and there. So And it looked like Alonso had a lot of fun. Fighting all the younger drivers this year, and seeing the competition that's there. I think there's a lot of one-on-one fights he got in with George Russell and even with Max, and he really enjoyed himself out there, and that's what you want to see with a two-time world champion returning after a retired season.
And great to see that fire from him at 40 years of age to still have the drive and the desire and the passion to achieve more than what he's already achieved, which is completely astounding with the 2 world championships. So I love seeing him back this year on the Formula One grid. And like you said, hopefully he has the car to fight for the championship in the next couple of seasons. And good point you bring up there. I think if there was a most improved driver award to give out, it could go to Esteban Ocon, because it looked a little bit sketchy at times last year against Daniel Ricciardo when he first came back into F1. But much like we saw Alonso this year finding his feet early on, returning after a few years off, it was the same thing with Esteban Ocon. So excellent season from them. And Alpine really stole 5th in the Constructors' Championship from this next team who finished 6th. And Alfa Tauri, who finished in 6th, really I think should have been 5th in the Constructors, which would have been their best ever finish in the standings. And we look at their season statistics. 1 podium finish courtesy of Gasly in Baku. Gasly finished 9th in the driver's standings with 15 points finishes, so 15 races in which he was in the points. His teammate, however, rookie Yuki Tsunoda, 14th in the driver's standings and only 7 points finishes. And Tsunoda only scored 32 points on the entire year, and the rest was covered by Pierre Gasly. And a lot of that was thanks to that big 4th place coming in the final race of the year. But Tyler, I really think that had Tsunoda done a little bit better in a few races, not had so many crashes, it really would have helped Alfa Tauri to get 5th in the Constructors, because Pierre Gasly was carrying the team all season long.
Yeah, I mean, those are the rookie jitters and getting used to a season in F1. But it would have gone a long way. And Tsunoda came out of the gate hot. He looked like, wow, well, this kid he was ready for F1. And then, it sort of kind of tailed off midway through the season. Excuse me. If not later on in the season as well. Which is unfortunate for AlphaTauri, but I mean, Pierre Gasly, as I've mentioned, was my non-Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen driver of the season, and for good reason as well. Like you said, he carried that AlphaTauri team, and most points ever scored by AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso, that whole brand, which is phenomenal for them. So
yeah.
Who knows what next year is going to bring? I mean, it's kind of hard to understand. Sometimes they're have a great car, sometimes they don't. It's up and down for AlphaTauri. But in the end, I think you can bring this as a very successful season for them.
I totally agree. I was expecting AlphaTauri to be in the 5th or 6th position, so I'm kind of happy they ended up getting it. And yeah, Pierre Gasly, I think the switch over last 2 seasons ago, I guess it wasn't last season, right? It was the season before.
2 seasons, yeah.
Yeah, I just what he I don't know what he did over that season and a half, but he's just he was definitely my driver, up there with my top 3 drivers of the season, next to Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Sainz, and Pierre Gasly. I think he's really going to be carrying that AlphaTauri team for a bit, and he just fits in so well with what they're trying to do. And like you said, I think Yuki Tsunoda, it's rookie jitters. He has impressed me this season. But like, he's a rookie. He's going to have his moments where he's not exactly sure what he has to do, fighting all these experienced drivers. So, I mean, in terms of rookie of the season, he's my rookie of the season. I don't think there's anybody else I would vote for. So
that's true, right? Because there's only the other 2 at Haas, which we'll get to in a few minutes' time. But I think based on results, yes, you would have to give it to Tsunoda as the rookie of the year. But it's interesting, Tyler, when you mention that it's the most points they've ever scored in a season, just underlines how good Pierre's season was, because 32 points only came from Tsunoda. So I forget exactly how the number is, but it's over 100 or so points that Pierre Gasly put in. So, I mean, it's an incredibly stellar year from them, and it just shows that if Tsunoda can live up to the potential, AlphaTauri's got a pretty good lineup on their hands. So a decent year for them, of course, but interesting moving forward for them as they try and kind of break out of that Red Bull B team mold that they've developed over the years. So then comes number 7th in the constructor standings as we round out the final 4 teams of this season. And the team that was probably the most disappointing of this season, which was Aston Martin. And Tyler, you and I both picked Aston Martin to finish P3 in the Constructors in 2021. So we got that astronomically wrong for this season. But
we weren't the only ones to pick that. Sebastian Vettel picked that himself.
That's right. So, hey, I mean, we're in agreement with Seb. But it was honestly, going off of 2020, it was the smart pick to make at the time because they were getting the 4-time world champion, the massive rebrand to Aston Martin, all the extra money and resources Lawrence Stroll was putting into it, and the Aston Martin group. Everything looked like it was humming along. The awesome team launch that they had, it was like, okay, Aston Martin is going to maybe be another big team like McLaren or Ferrari. But the regulation changes really hit Aston Martin incredibly hard with the low rake concept that they ran, and unfortunately they did not have the solutions to find as Mercedes did with the same low rake concept, and it led them to having a very, very poor season. Only 2 podiums on their part, and I put an asterisk to one of those because it was taken away from Vettel at the Hungarian Grand Prix, so technically only 1 podium. Sebastian Vettel 12th in the Drivers' Championship with that 1 podium at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix with 7 races in the points. Lance Stroll 13th place in the Drivers' Championship and with 9 races in the points. So just all in all, my only comment on Aston Martin is just a very disappointing and forgetful year for them after what was a record season in 2021. And they're really, really hoping that they're going to nail these 22 regulations because they could end up being one of these bigger teams fighting for the championship. But this was absolutely a season to forget for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 2022 season needs to be a huge comeback season for them because we all expected them to have a very, very good car this year, and it just wasn't there for them. Unfortunately, they got the specifications wrong, and yes, of course, the regulations attack the low rate cars, Mercedes and Aston Martin. But no matter what, you do have to innovate and try to come with the best car that you can. And I'm not sure if they focus their direction in 2022, maybe midway through the season. I'm not sure exactly what their whole structure was. But I hope the case is that they come back with a stronger year in 2022. And, Vettel had a very solid season. Stroll had his moments as well, but it was nothing spectacular out of either of them. Seb looked like he had the most fun out there, which I think is one of the most important. And you know what? We have to give him kudos. He did win the award for the most overtakes this season. Actually, he won 2 trophies. He also won the grid trophy as well on the F1 YouTube channel. So 2 trophies, technically 3 trophies if you count the podium for Sebastian Vettel this year. Obviously, they all don't count exactly where they should, but in the end, maybe some consolation prizes to take home for him.
I agree with you guys that it was disappointing season for Aston Martin overall. I disagree though. I think they should remember this season as money can't buy everything.
Good point.
I think like you guys have mentioned, we were expecting a lot from Aston Martin. And just to see that they couldn't adjust to any of it throughout the season, it seemed like midway through the season, they had kind of figured some things out. And then all the other teams made progress that went far beyond what they could catch up to. And it seemed like you said, it would seem, I don't know if by that point they're like, let's just shift all our focus to 2022. Because at the moment, do we have confirmed drivers? Like, are Lance Stroll and Vettel technically confirmed?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
I 43 points for Seb and 34 for Lance Stroll. I would have liked to see them fighting more Alpine and Alfa Tauri this year. So it's kind of disappointing to see if McLaren and Alpine this year. So it's kind of disappointing to see in terms of what we were expecting Ferrari to be. We were expecting them to be 7th or 8th or 6th or 7th. So. Yeah, I hope they remember this season, and I hope they make improvements to that car because I think it's still the nicest looking car on the grid. So,
yeah, there's a little consolation there for them, but I think Vettel had a good recovery year considering his 2020 season. Rough start to his life at Aston Martin, but eventually found his footing. But of course, like you said, Shaker, I mean, it doesn't matter what billionaire you have supporting you in the scenes with financials and otherwise, you still got to have a good car in order to challenge some of these other teams and drivers. And Aston Martin just didn't produce that one as well. So they didn't live up to the hype this year, but look, and remember the 2021 as a good motivation to continue to work hard for the future. So they're going to really need a big recovery season for next year. But a team that had a pretty good recovery season and who finished 8th in this year's Constructors' Championship was Williams. And considering the last few seasons from Williams, I think that they had a pretty solid season that they can be satisfied with heading into the new generation of cars. They had one podium finish, of course, with the 3-lap race at the Belgian Grand Prix, but nonetheless, it was a fantastic lap from George Russell in the wet on Saturday that put him in P2 to give him that podium. Russell finished 15th in the driver's standings. He had 4 races in the points. His teammate Nicholas Latifi was 17th in the Drivers' Championship, and he had 2 races in which he finished in the points. So all in all, I think for them to finish 8th was probably the best target for this season, finishing ahead of rivals Alfa Romeo and Haas. I think just a really good way to put the turbo hybrid era behind them, as it was a good start to the turbo hybrid era for them, but of course a disastrous finish. But this was at least a good way to kind of get the Williams name back in the good spirits of Formula One, and a good send-off for Russell before he goes off into Mercedes. And I think that Williams have a pretty good outlook on their future now with Latifi and Albon for 2022 and the new investment capital firm that they have behind them. So all in all, I think a good, most improved team for 2021 had to be go to Williams.
Yeah, I would agree, and I was so happy to see them. Obviously the target I think was to finish ahead of Haas. But to finish ahead of Alfa Romeo as well, it was, I'm sure are very happy with that situation. And they had a really good middle of the season where they found a lot of pace in that Williams car. And for George Russell, I mean, we know what he can do on Saturday, how impressive he is, and he showed that, and it won him a podium, his first podium in Formula One, and it almost won him the whole race. He wasn't too far off winning or getting pole position, and then which would have ended up him winning the race as well. So phenomenal year for him. Still like to see him be a little more calculated on Sundays and have a little more success on Sundays. But we'll see next year for him with a car that will obviously perform. So we think. For Nicholas Latifi, I thought it was a very good season and a really, really good final half of the season. I think he showed a lot of people that he can drive pretty fast as well, finishing ahead of Russell a few times in qualifying, and in the race as well, I believe a few times. He's got good racecraft and he has good tire management as well. So if he can get a car from underneath him, I think he can make a really good name for himself, Nicholas Latifi, and he's a fantastic guy as well. So we want to see good things for the Canadian. I just really hope that, like you said, the new investment capital that is controlling at Williams for this season and seasons to go on, they find the innovation and the right stuff to be able to have a competitive car next year.
A huge turnaround year from Williams, to obviously, still being under the Williams name, but losing the original owners, Williams, and obviously the passing away of Frank Williams just a few months ago as well. Huge heartbreaking season for them as well. And I don't think we were expecting them to turn around so fast. I think maybe towards the end of the season, last season we had predicted that, in 2022 is probably where they're going to be investing most of their money to get ready for that season. And to see an improvement so quick with the new owners coming in, and it's really like to see that. And, his George Russell has just been fantastic in that Williams since he's been in there, and it's got him a seat on Mercedes overall. And just great overall season for Williams, and I really hope they keep improving. And Nicholas Latifi is definitely going to have the Canadian Dutch moment of the year. So it's
yeah, he decided the championship, right?
Yeah. So it's to be in your second season. End up getting a few points finishes for Williams, who weren't expected. I think they did a prediction thing at the beginning of the season, and I think Latifi's prediction was that Williams will get points this season, or a point this season, and he's like, you know what, we did that and we got multiple. So yes, we definitely achieved that. So yeah, it's great for Williams overall with everything that's happened to them in this past year.
Yeah, and a good point that you bring up there with the carryover season, with the cars not being too different from 2020. It was an impressive season for them to get multiple races in the points from both drivers. I do agree with Tyler, your point there, that Latifi showed himself a little bit this year, and a lot of people are really starting to become fans of him. He's kind of shed that pay driver moniker that a lot of people put on him when he entered F1, but he's showing that he has a spot in Formula One, and he'll have an excellent teammate with Alex Albon next to him for 2022. So I'm looking forward to another Canadian staying on the grid, and of course seeing Russell move on to Mercedes will be exciting. But a good recovery year for Williams Racing. And the final two teams of our championship, we have Alfa Romeo in ninth. And unfortunately, I don't have much to say about Alfa Romeo because they were just kind of that disappointing this year. Of course, the retiring Kimi Räikkönen, who made the best prediction of all at the start of 2020 or 2021, which was that he was going to retire because he knew way before any of us did. He finished 16th in his final season of Formula One with 4 races in the points. Antonio Giovinazzi all the way down in 18th place in the driver's standings with only 2 races in the points. And of course, he loses his seat to Guan Yu Zhou, and he's out of Formula One. So just some quick thoughts on Alfa Romeo's 2021 season.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Kimi Räikkönen's retirement was sealed up in a gray envelope since March is pretty incredible. That he knew a long time ago that this was going to be his last season, and to very witty by him to put that in there. And if you haven't watched the predictions video, even if you don't want to watch the whole thing, just skip to the last minute where Räikkönen, they do a full segment on Kimi, because it is some of the funniest stuff you'll see. I mean, I laughed at it. It was phenomenal from Kimi. You got to watch it. Yeah, you do have to watch it.
Send me that link. I'm definitely going to check that out.
If it wasn't for Kimi, I would probably have nothing to talk about Alfa Romeo from this season. But I wish we would have had Kimi have a better end of the season. End to his career. We wanted him obviously to do well and to have a nice send off, but in the end it was classic Kimi. Kimi was Kimi this season, and I think he had a lot of fun just being himself and trying to play that cool Kimi card.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about Alpha. I'm just going to talk about Kimi as well. But no, in all honesty, I think I was expecting Alfa Romeo to be a little bit higher this year, and to see them in ninth is kind of disappointing. But yeah, I think overall it's kind of a Kimi overall season. He did kind of what he wanted, and the way, not really with the way that he wanted to go, but I would have loved to see him do donuts with like Alonso and Vettel and all those guys that he's raced with throughout the years, and actually get to enjoy himself. I think there was another video posted from Kimi Räikkönen about what he's doing after Formula One, and he's like, I don't know, but I don't care. Like the most Kimi moment you can have at the end of their career. He's like, yeah, I'm just going to do what I want at this point. So it's going to be sad to not see him in F1 this year. And I just want one time for him to come back as like a pundit or something on Formula One just to see what he has to say. But yeah, it's a bittersweet moment for AlphaTauri, I guess, in the end, because they had 2 DNFs. So
it's sad to see Räikkönen leave Formula One, obviously, because he's a legend, a former world champion, and probably the most unique character we've ever had in this sport. So he had some good moments this year, some great wheel-to-wheel racing with his old friends Sebastian and Fernando at certain times. But, of course, it's kind of been a regression ever since he's moved to Alfa Romeo. He hasn't necessarily been on top form, but that car wasn't really where it was supposed to be after all these seasons. So disappointing for Alfa Romeo. Antonio Giovinazzi as well, just not very many races in the points, and he wasn't bad in his career at Alfa Romeo, but I just don't think he did enough to impress the Sauber bosses to keep him around for much longer. So Alfa Romeo are looking to some of the younger drivers for their future. So best of luck to both Giovinazzi and Räikkönen and whatever they do. I think Räikkönen's happy to be on the beach right now somewhere, and Giovinazzi's moving on to Formula E. So their futures are settled for the moment. So we finally reached the final team of 2021, and I'm sure this one will be a short one as well. Of course, Haas F1 team finishing 10th in the constructor standings with 0 points, their worst season since their debut in 2016. Mick Schumacher, which we were all excited about, and very kind of a feel-good story of 2021, seeing the young Schumacher make his debut, 19th in the driver's standings, 2 Q2 appearances, so he did have some pretty solid moments this season, had an excellent race in Portugal all the way back in the beginning of the year, and his teammate Nikita Mazepin, this stat might surprise some people, 21st in the driver's standings, but we only have 20 drivers. So,
Robert Kubica, well done, Robert.
Yeah, if you guys are wondering how that is possible, Robert Kubica, who filled in for Raikkonen in Holland and Monza, finished the race ahead of Mazepin, who actually happened to retire in both those races. So, a bad season for Mazepin just got a little bit worse.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Haas was focusing on next season. They said that from the beginning of the year. They're focusing on 2022, and this year was going to be a wash. And clearly, it was. It was a wash. They'll all start from the ground up and work their way into 2022, and hopefully we see them competitive in 2022. But I thought Mick Schumacher had a really good season for what he was given. He outclassed Mazepin pretty much every single race that they took part in, that they battled in. And, Schumacher was usually always ahead. I'm not sure what the teammate comparison was between the two drivers who had more race finishes ahead of one another.
Yeah,
but I know. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry to butt in. I just know that because I was doing the video yesterday. The quali gap was around 0.6 on average.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. And I'm not sure if that says more about Mick or more about Nikita or a mix of both. But something that we'll have to visit next year when they both have hopefully a somewhat more competitive car.
Yeah, and I think, this was the season to forget for Haas. It didn't seem like they cared. They had some really good, I think they had the most feel-good moments in terms of team radios that I've seen for Mick Schumacher and, what was his name?
Gary. Gary Gana.
Gary.
Yeah, I think, best feel-good moments to see between, a driver and, sitting on the pit wall. So I think Mick Schumacher definitely showed moments where he can impress, and I think next year with, hopefully Haas did do what they said and put all that money into 2022, and I would love to see both of them fight. I think I always like to see drivers turn themselves around, and Mazepin's obviously going to be in the sport for a little bit, so if he wants to stay there, I think I'd like to see him improve as well. So
yeah, I will give credit to Mazepin because he did improve throughout the season. Small increments, but he did make some improvements. Sure. And you could argue that he kept the car in one piece more often than Mick Schumacher did, who had just a little bit too many big crashes for my liking, especially for a team like Haas, who are limited on money and resources, so that was difficult. But overall, I think Schumacher had a solid debut season of Formula One. The way he's building the relationship with the Haas team is very much like his father used to do at Ferrari, so he's learned quite well in that regard. And I think that he's shown a lot of potential in terms of all three of the rookies. Him and Tsunoda showed the most potential for a good future in the sport. And, Mazepin, it'll be up on him next season if the car is better the first task is to beat his teammate. So he didn't do it this year, and Mick, like you said, Tyler, outclassed him. So that's all really Schumacher could have done this season, and it would be nice to see him fighting a little bit higher up in 2022. But that'll wrap up the conversation on Haas and the top 10 teams in general. So thank you to you both for giving your thoughts and opinions on all the 10 teams and 20 drivers of 2021. We are at the end of our podcast recapping the 2021 season. Before we sign off for the final time this year, we do have some fan questions that we're going to get to just quickly, doing a rapid fire round before we sign off for this season. And we appreciate everybody submitting these questions, and we do actually have quite a few to get through, so I will waste no further time and get to the first question that comes from Martin Aguilar, who has 3 questions actually. So I'll pose this to you guys and we'll give our quick answers. So first question, why is Lewis Hamilton so divisive? I never know how to pronounce that word. So divisive.
Potato,
exactly. Why is Lewis Hamilton so divisive amongst the fans? I don't believe because he has won many championships is the answer. So what did you guys think?
I think it's just... with the whole rivalry this year with Max and Lewis, I think it's whether you're a Max fan or a Lewis fan, that fan base is very divided. The hardcores are, at least. The neutrals aren't as divided, I don't think. But I think it just has a lot to do with the drama, and with Lewis Hamilton dominating for so long. You have the crowd that are fans of Lewis and loving it, and the crowd that maybe want to see a change as well. So I think it doesn't have to do with Lewis's personality per se, but just how dominant he's been and the rivalry that he's had with Max.
Yeah, I don't like divisive isn't the word to use there, but there's always rivalry in sports. You Messi, Ronaldo, LeBron, and Curry. There's always going to be rivalry in every sport, and it just what makes the sport so great to watch, because you get to see these two greats. One guy who's like mid-30s, coming to the 40s at the end of his career, try to get this world record, and then you have this young driver, who came out when he was 16 years old and had this entire team put trust in him to bring them a world championship. So of course, there's always going to be divisive things. It's all the young versus old. New driver versus old. So it's what makes the sport so interesting, and what makes every sport interesting.
Yeah, good answers for you both. Martin's second question is he's asking, is Checo the perfect partner for Max Verstappen? Explain your reasons why or why not.
Perfect is a strong word to use there. So if you're using the word perfect, I would say no, he's not the perfect teammate. He's a very good teammate for Max and does a great job there, and will continue to do a great job next season, I believe. But I don't think perfect is the right word for it. I think that Max would need someone a little more consistent than Checo, and that's not a knock on Checo. But he does have his moments, just as Valtteri does, and just like every driver does. But he needs someone to push him every single race for the race victory, like a Lewis Hamilton, for example. And obviously that will never happen. But in my opinion, I don't know if there is even a perfect teammate that's on the grid right now for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I wouldn't say perfect teammate for Max, but I would say the perfect driver for Red Bull, second driver for Red Bull, because he's exactly what they needed. They needed a driver that knew they weren't going to be the number one driver, somebody who knew was going to put up competition with Lewis Hamilton, fight for those podiums and points, and just be there when he can be, and he was, later half of the season. There was a lot of positions that if he wasn't there, Lewis Hamilton would have gained those extra few seconds that he needed. But he just provided. He like I said, he's the perfect driver for Red Bull to get that world championship for Max, I would say.
Yeah, like you guys said, perfect might not be the word, but I think Sergio Perez is the ideal teammate for Max Verstappen, and you'll see hopefully in 2022, if he gets up to speed a little bit quicker, you'll see him be just the right teammate for Verstappen. Because I don't know exactly who would be the perfect teammate for Max Verstappen, or does it really matter at this point? Because Verstappen's at such a high level that only a driver like Lewis Hamilton could potentially match his level. So yeah, you kind of need a good balance, which I think Red Bull, since the departure of Daniel Ricciardo, have finally found with Sergio Perez in that second seat. So Martin's final question is, what is the limit of amount of teams that can participate in F1? If there is a limit, explain why. Now, I don't know if he's asking in terms of the direct regulations, the sporting regulations of how many teams can we have or how many do we want, but I know, Tyler, this is like a question perfectly for you.
Put more teams on the grid. I don't know if there's a limit. My personal limit would be 26 cars, so 13 teams. I think that's it's not too clustery, but it gives a lot of drivers that maybe should be in F1 a chance. I'm not sure, again, like I said, if there is an exact limit in the regulations, but I would love to see 13 teams. And there's a possibility that we do have an 11th team come in. I know, I believe it's Audi something. There's a partnership there that has a possibility of venturing into F1. Maybe Chris will. Was it Porsche Audi?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be phenomenal. That needs to happen, in my opinion. Hopefully, it happens as early as 2023, and they get their interest in. But for me, 26 cars would be great on the grid.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, right? Like it's almost you want to see more teams on the grid to have more drivers, and like Tyler mentioned, just to because there are such great drivers out there, not just in Formula One, around the world competing in different competition, but just to have more drivers on the grid would make it interesting, and I think would provide more competition in the actual races. And I think it would make the whole sprint race situation kind of more interesting. Um, but like 20 is kind of like the perfect number, 10 and 10, top 10 position, you're out
Yeah.
with top.
It's a nice. It's a nice round number.
Yeah, it's I don't know if I'd go 13. I think I'd go like 12. I think I'd go with 24 drivers. I think would be a good amount. I feel like just those extra two drivers would be a little bit too much. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna go 12. My number as well. But if we can get one or two extra teams, that's what we've all want. We've been talking about that for years, so it's a pretty relevant question from Martin. So thank you, Martin, to your questions. He also says keep up the good work at the end of his question. So thank you for that, and we appreciate you asking the question. So moving right along, then we got this user called Darth Snarf asks. So you should each pick a top moment of racing from the season, which we've already done in the earlier, so we won't address that right now. And also, what do you think of the new and changed layout tracks, and if you want them to return next year? I personally want to see like 5 spots put on a rotation so that we can get some new tracks every single year to keep it interesting. And I completely agree with your final point there, and we've talked about this many times in the course of this season in our podcast with the ever-changing calendars, that we should have a rotation of tracks like Imola and Portimao and the Nürburgring and things like that. So he's asking, what do you think of the new and changed layout tracks? For me personally, like the changes to the circuit to Barcelona, Catalunya didn't really do that much to impact racing. I think the changes at Abu Dhabi, they were a little bit better, but I think that racing at Abu Dhabi is still not the most exciting. Some of the new tracks that we saw this year, of course, the big one was Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. I think that track is going to need some changes to improve the safety, because we can't be relying on a racetrack to just give us red flags and safety cars to provide exciting racing. So I think that will need to be changed. I do believe it has some sort of a place on the F1 calendar if we're going to go with these crazy amount of races. But yeah, those are just some of my thoughts on those. So what do you guys think about that question?
Yeah, I would agree. Saudi Arabia, like you said, needs some safety improvements. I'm not sure how exactly they're going to figure that out. But that's up to the team over there to decide. Abu Dhabi, I thought Karun Chandok and his team, or the team he works with, did a great job at refining that racetrack. There's a couple of spots that I think need a change or two, but it looks a lot better and raced a lot better than what it did, in my opinion, over the races before. Qatar was phenomenal. I really enjoyed the what was it? Whatever. Losail, yeah. Something. There was an O in there somewhere. I really enjoyed that track. I loved Imola's back on the calendar, and it's back on the calendar again for next season. And I do really like your idea of a rotating schedule. Just pulling up the schedule for next season. Singapore is on there as well, which is a race we haven't seen in a few years. Japan, a race we haven't seen in a few years. So those will be very exciting to go back there. Of course, our home Grand Prix in Canada hopefully will be back next year as well. And a reminder, Australia is round 3 of next season. So there's 4 tracks right there that we haven't had in a couple of years that will be rotated back into the schedule.
And Australia has a lot of changes too.
Yes, yeah, Australia does have a lot of changes.
We haven't gone there in a few years, right? It's been 2 years since.
2 years, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree. If having 5 rotating spots would be great, because I think
I forgot about Miami as well. Miami's getting a race next year, so there's another new track.
Yeah. But yeah, I think at one point in the season we talked about all the other tracks that were, some of our favorite tracks around the world. And yeah, there's just so many to bring back. And I think, they raced at Nürburgring last year because of COVID, and this year they didn't go to Germany at all, I want to say. Maybe I'm wrong. No,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you're right.
The drivers loved racing in Nürburgring. It's just the entire atmosphere of Nürburgring. It's got such history behind it. And yeah, there's just I'm trying to think of other laps, other tracks, but it was kind of. Did Brazil have a change this year? No,
No,
right?
no.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. Having a rotating track would make it way more interesting. I might get hate on for this comment, but I don't think they should race at Catalunya if they're going to do testing at Catalunya.
I agree with you. So, but I think I said this on the season preview.
Like, if you're spending so many days in Catalunya, go race some other part of Spain. Go to Portugal. Portugal was cool.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I just if you're gonna do, or if they decide to choose some other track, if you're gonna do testing at a track, I feel like you should be racing somewhere else. It just
sorry, go ahead. I thought you said Portugal.
sorry. That was it.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, I apologize.
No, it's okay.
I think if you bring back the Valencia street circuit, maybe. There's a great video on YouTube. I forget the lad's name that did it, but he goes around the abandoned Valencia street circuit in the spots that were built just for the street circuit. It's really, really interesting, and I highly recommend watching it. But I mean, they go there or go to Jerez or something, right? Like, I think we're all tired of seeing Barcelona.
And then doesn't the France Grand Prix have like a bunch of different ways you can set up that track? Like, why not change it every year? Make it interesting. If you're going to do a France Grand Prix, which is, we've never seen an interesting one until this year, just change it around. You have the complete capability to do that. And I'm sure it would make it so much more interesting that they're not going to know, maybe surprise them 3 days before the actual track day. It's like, guys, this is going to be the track layout.
That'd be cool. Or
Pull it out of a hat.
Or have a different layout for every session.
Yeah. But yeah, just like I think there are some tracks like that on the grid already where they can change the layout of it. And if they're not going to do a rotating track circuit like that, they can just alter the track a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting. Not have the same, exact same race every year.
Well, good points by all of you guys. I think that was a pretty good answer to that question. A little bit more than they must have expected too. So thank you to whoever you were for that question as well. So the final 3 questions of the season for us this year. This comes from user named Mythlond. Which driver or team had the worst luck this season, in your opinion? Tyler, I'll start with you.
Well, that's a good one. Is it bad to say Verstappen? Like, he did have really bad luck.
Yeah, you could say that.
I'm going to go with that right now, which is silly because he won the world championship, but he had a lot of bad luck this year. Of course, he had a lot of good luck, and it kind of counteracted itself with Latifi crashing. But he had a lot of bad luck this year. So I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. Might sound silly, but
bad luck for driver, I'm going to go with Kimi Räikkönen. And then for team, I'm going to go with Aston Martin.
Yeah.
Good picks. I think for bad luck, you have to go with bad luck Bottas for 2021.
Yeah.
I mean, the week-long pit stop in Monaco, the messed up strategies and other different things. I know Valtteri didn't have the best of seasons, but next to Verstappen, I think that, he'd probably be the driver with the worst luck this season. But that's kind of something that he's had in his whole Formula One career. So, but I actually do agree with you, Tyler, on the Verstappen front, just because had certain things gone his way earlier in the season, we probably never would have even gotten Abu Dhabi to begin with. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. So, thanks for that question. Final question, or the penultimate question, comes from Sven W. Sven, who I recognize from the Netherlands, from our way back in the beginning of the season on our preseason testing live streams. He was a regular contributor there. So he asked this question kind of in he's suggesting it in a clickbait tone for maybe a separate video, but he says, did Lewis deserve the title more than Max, and why? Or why Lewis deserved this title more than Max? Since Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton seem to feel that they did. He says, also, I think the new cars for next year will be a catalyst for a lot of discussions and video topics, which I definitely agree with that. I think the cars are going to be very interesting next year. And he just rounds it off by saying, Max did say the new cars are going to be a few seconds slower per lap than this year's car, and this year's car might be the fast in the corners if it even isn't the quickest car when it comes down to raw speed. And I actually am hearing that the cars of next year will be much faster than they originally expected, and they will be a little bit slower, but I think they'll might even catch up to this year's cars maybe by the end of the season, which should be interesting. But let's address Sven's question in the beginning. Did Lewis deserve the title more than Max?
No, not in my opinion. He had a phenomenal season. Max had a better season. I would have been, like I said in the Abu Dhabi recap, I would have been very happy with either driver winning the championship. They both deserve the championship. But if you're going to who deserved it more, I would say Max deserved it more.
Yeah, I totally agree. Max won more races. He was there for the qualifying. And I for our question beforehand, if he didn't experience some bad luck throughout the year, there would be no competition in Abu Dhabi happening at all between Lewis and Max. So, yeah, I think he totally deserved it. And so, what was there a second part of that question too?
No, it was just more just a comment talking about next year's cars and how much faster or slower they're going to be.
Yeah, no, I think Max totally deserved that championship, and that's why I was honestly very happy to see it go down to the last lap and, fight for, whatever happened all season, it's down to that one lap to see who deserves it more or who wants it more, I guess.
Yep, well said. Both deserving champions, but I do think Verstappen was the much better driver throughout 2021 and ultimately did deserve that little bit of luck that went his way, regardless of if we all still believe that Mercedes were hard done by the stewards in the FIA. But nonetheless, you can't take this championship away from Max Verstappen. So thanks to Sven for that question. And the final question is from Liquor Food, who says, who had the faster car over the entire season, Red Bull or Mercedes? And now, this is a very interesting question because this has gone back and forth all year long. And I don't think that we can actually give an answer because I believe that those two cars were so even throughout the year that small little tangible things made the difference, like tire temperatures, track surfaces, different things like that I think really made the difference. I believe certainly in the last 5-6 races, Mercedes had the faster car because Red Bull lost a significant amount of performance in relation to the rest of the field, not just Mercedes. But I do believe that in the beginning of the year, Red Bull had an advantage in their car. They had an advantage over their car, but I think that they had an easier time finding the right setup window for the RB16B, whereas Mercedes were only able to unlock the potential of their car after the updates in Silverstone. So I don't know if we can even say that there was one car was faster than the other because it kind of really ebbed and flowed throughout the whole season.
My answer is going to be Mercedes, and this is why, Chris. Who had the fastest car at the end of the season when all the upgrades are in and you're supposed to be at your peak? It was Mercedes. So in my opinion, although it was close throughout the year and Red Bull had the faster car at the midway point of the season, Mercedes had the fastest car when it all came down to it. So my answer is going to be Mercedes.
My answer is also Mercedes, but I also think that Red Bull never had the fastest car all year. I think they just had the fastest driver. And again, I'm going to bring it down to numbers. 11 fastest laps won by Mercedes all year compared to the 8. And it's one of the reasons, I don't know if I mentioned this in a podcast, but I've definitely talked about it with my friends. I want qualifying to be just one car. You get your starting lap, you get to go around and you start your one lap, and that way there is no competition or decisiveness between which one is the fastest car in each lap. It is decided between the qualifying lap and what you showed in raw pace. And I think that should, it kind of decides what's going to be the fastest car at the end of the season. But if we're going by strict numbers, Mercedes was the fastest car all season. There's a few races that Red Bull won fastest lap only because they were in the prime position to get DRS. But yeah, I think I agree with Tyler. I think Mercedes had the fastest car all season. I don't think there was a competition, but I think they were the clear winner.
Yeah, fair enough. And that makes Verstappen's championship all the more impressive if they definitely indeed had the faster car. So, yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you all to your questions. You've submitted that on the community tab on our YouTube channel. Like I said, we're always open on social media as well if you have any questions, usually for our podcast. But Gentlemen, that was our lengthiest podcast of the year, but what else did we expect for what was an absolutely incredible 2021 season? And just from all of us, I know you guys are probably going to have some final comments as well, but thank you to everybody out there who have tuned into the Backmarkers F1 Show podcast, because this is something that obviously we started 5 years ago now, almost in 2018, and it was really the three of us just doing this, what we're doing right now, rambling on about Formula One, and it was a very small audience at the time. And it's been growing every year since then. And really, to be able to do this in a great season like this, we've been waiting for this ever since we started our podcast. We got a little glimpse of it in our 2018, our first year, but nothing compared to what 2021 was like. So we really appreciate everybody listening, everybody sharing their opinions, whether we disagreed or not. We really do thank you for all your support. So I thank you guys as well, Shaker and Tyler, for making time throughout the year with your schedules to jump on these podcasts, doing them late at night, doing them earlier, whatever it is, weekends, weekdays, after work. We all made it work through Zoom here this year. So thank you to you both, and I'll leave the final comments to you guys for this year.
Oh yeah, Chris, I echo your statement to our supporters. Thank you very much to everyone who has supported us over the years. And if you're new for this season, well, we welcome you on it. And thanks for tuning in for this wonderful season it was in 2021. It's been awesome to see this channel grow. I know we were just doing this for fun, and we all have a good time when we're doing it. And we'll see where the channel goes, but with all the support you guys have, we're really loving what we do. So thank you to the supporters. And Chris, I want to thank you as well for all the hard work that you did this season, for putting out all those extra videos that go along with the podcasts, doing a lot of the editing behind the scenes, and staying up late at night to get these videos out. So I want to thank you as well for doing that. And Shaker, I want to thank you for being on the podcast as a new dog owner, making the time, and it's always awesome to chat with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was away the most on all these podcasts this year. So, thank you guys for, working with my schedule on some of those days where I was working like 12, 14-hour days on film sets. So, and yeah, I mean, thank you to all our supporters. And I think I say it every year. We wouldn't do this if we didn't like it and people watched it. Like to have the feedback that we do on a lot of our comments and stuff. We say all the time, we love the comments, and we'd love to, we'll talk shit if we want to, but we genuinely enjoy getting those comments and reading them, and it makes what we do so much more interesting, because we know there's people watching. It's not just us talking to each other and hoping for the best. So yeah, I really appreciate all the support, and like Tyler mentioned, Chris, for all I think you put in the most hard work these last 2 years with COVID and everything, all the behind the scenes work that you do that nobody knows about. It's not just us recording the podcast. There's graphics work and a bunch of other stuff that goes behind it, and editing, and obviously following along with all the storylines. It's Chris that brings them to us, and we talk about it. So he does a lot of work behind the scenes that nobody ever knows about. So
no, thank you guys for those words. And yeah, shit hit the fan in the last 2 years, and of course it's been a pretty difficult time, but me not working as much in my regular job means that I had more time for this. So trying to make this into hopefully what will be a long career covering Formula One. And some of the new videos that I put out this year, some worked, some that didn't, but this is an opportunity maybe for the fans out there to make some suggestions of what type of extra content they'd like to see on our channel for 2022. We're always going to have the podcast with the three of us, and whenever you guys have time, you jump in on extra videos, but the podcast will always be something that we do as a trio, because it's how we started, and that's how it's always going to be until one of us decides to retire and never do it again. But it won't be for a while, I'm sure. So any content suggestions, drop them in the comments section down below, or just send us an email, thebackmarkersf1show@gmail.com, for any suggestions. And if you do like to support the channel further, other than just watching and subscribing, we do have some donation links in the description below if you are kind enough to give us some money. Of course, not necessary. I know everybody's pretty tight for money nowadays, so your support means all the more if you just at least watch our videos, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel is enough, but the links are there just in case you want to support further. So that'll do it for the Backmarkers F1 Show podcast in 2021. We do have a few more videos coming out for this year, and then we're going to take some time off in January, and then we'll be back close to the end of January getting ready for the preseason of 2022. It's going to be here a lot quicker than you guys imagine. We'd like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. Really enjoy yourselves, guys. Enjoy everything that this year had to offer from an exceptional Formula One season. It's been a privilege. So for Tyler McDonald, Shaker Barty, I'm Chris Cato for the last time signing off this year. Take care, guys.